Hatsqual Tanoyap, Siyams, Siyait, Siyoyokwa, Chin Clementomiap, Kakakanak Chesiam, Si Toktin, Kwashaman Sna, not Skahot Mishokamel, not Kamalai, Kamalai. Chin Clementomiap, T seats. Just opening in one of the original languages of this land, the Sakahopnish language, saying it's great to see each and every one of you, respected leaders, family heads, friends, relatives, and acquaintances. My name is C. Toktin, given name is Chris Lewis. My formal job title is Director of Indigenous Initiatives and Reconciliation out of the President's Office at Simon Fraser University. But most importantly, I'm a proud member of the Skahopmishokamelk, which is known as the Squamish Nation. I welcomed you on behalf of our people to our place here that we call Come Kamalai. Can everyone say Come Kamalai? It's real easy. So Come Kamalai means the place of giant maple trees. And so if you think about downtown, used to be giant maple trees here. And we would use maple because it was a hardwood for certain tools and certain materials. And so it was important that you knew those place names, then you knew where to go. If your grandpa told you, go get some maple for me, you kind of knew where to go, and it was a little bit of the atlas. It talks about an ancient time before these buildings were here. So on behalf of the family and the host here today, we want to welcome you and thank you all for coming and honoring the invitation to listen to one of our speakers from Haida Gwaii. I think about the connection that we have as host peoples, the Skahopmish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. We have deep connections that go back into our ancient times and our ancient stories to the Haida Gwaii, to the people, about kinship, about how we came together. And all of those stories are still here. So every time I come into this great house, even though I've been here many times, I'm always floored by the energy in here, the richness that we have as Indigenous peoples, and the connection that we have as Indigenous peoples up and down what we now call the Northwest Coast, and our connection to the water that connects us. So I think about that as we embark upon this journey, and on behalf of my people, the Skahopmish, who have a village to the south and 3 villages on the North Shore. So I didn't drive from Squamish. Thinking about that connection that we have, and we have these little hidden gems in the middle of a city that talk about our connections and our richness as Indigenous peoples. My grandfather and my teachers would say we wouldn't build and erect these great poles and mortuary poles and things that we did as Indigenous people on the coast if we didn't have wealth. We had wealth so that we could stay in one spot and actually work on it. We weren't chasing things around all the time. The resources were right there. So on behalf of the family, I look forward to spending time with you today. I'll be one of your co-MCs, and I love that the room's full. We also have a great online presence as well, so people will be having questions via Slido. But I'm going to pass it over to my brother Brian here to introduce himself and talk a little bit about why we're all here today. Hosiam Tamakwitsis Nation, thank you so much for being here.
All right, thank you, Sitoktin. Welcome everybody, and thank you for coming this afternoon. My name is Brian Miles. I'm a settler, Canadian. I'm from Treaty 4 territory in southern Saskatchewan, and I've been living on Coast Salish territory here as an uninvited guest for about 15 years now. Treaty 4 is the traditional territory of the Nehewak people, or the Cree, the Anishinaabe, or the Saulteaux people, and the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, and it's the homeland of the Métis Nation. And I'd like to acknowledge that my family are direct beneficiaries of Treaty 4. We've benefited for generations because of Treaty 4. And I also recognize that the Indigenous signatories to that treaty have not benefited equally as many settler communities have. You know, I'm really excited. This is an excited time for the Bill Reid Centre. Sorry, I often use the acronym, the BRC. We've been working for many years. I used to work in the basement of this building kind of since our inception, really, and we're now up at SFU. We're really building on a lot of past successes that we've had over the years, so I'm really happy that this event has come together and that the room is so full. What we're doing here today is really honoring Lucy Bell, who is our visiting fellow at the Bill Reid Centre, our second visiting fellow, so we're very happy that this is something that's continuing. What the Bill Reid Centre Visiting Fellow is really a position that's trying to honor the legacy of Bill Reid by providing an opportunity for the SFU community, the broader public community, students, artists, cultural experts, to really get a sense and understand and hear Indigenous perspectives on various topics that are taking place. So it's our opportunity to bring in someone to the Bill Reid Centre. Oh, sorry, am I not being loud enough? Sorry, it's our opportunity to bring someone into the Bill Reid Centre who can really share their knowledge, share their expertise, and use the resources that we have at the Bill Reid Centre at SFU to really further their studies or their artistic practice or whatever they're working on. So the intent is really to support the fellows' long-term practice while simultaneously contributing to thought-provoking conversations that I hope we'll have today. So before we begin, I would just like to, on behalf of the Bill Reid Centre, say thank you to the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. We received a grant from them, reconciling the curriculum funding to host this event and to host Lucy, so which has been very exciting for us. Public Square, who's been a really amazing partner to have in promoting and amplifying this event. And I personally, and on behalf of the Bill Reid Centre, I'd like to give a heartfelt thank you to Mr. Frank Anfield, who's made so much possible for the Bill Reid Centre over many years. So just a very warm and heartfelt thank you, Frank, to your support. There's also a number of other supporters that have helped the Bill Reid Centre be what it is today and progress over the years, and that is the late Mr. Charlie Panzareski and the late Mr. Morris Fellis. So I hope that some of their Charlie and Morris's family, friends might be watching or with us today, because I'd really like you to know how much their contributions and support has meant for the Bill Reid Centre over the years. So it's people like them and people like you, Frank, that really make it possible to do the things we're doing and make it possible to you know, keep the center's objectives and visions and goals moving forward. So before we get started with Lucy's talk, I'd just like to have a couple housekeeping items that we'd like to run by everyone. So please note that the event is being recorded, live streamed and photographed. So we ask that everyone please keep the noise to a minimum if they can, and please turn off the sound on any phones or devices that you have. So this event is also taking place until about 4:30, so please feel free to take breaks, move around, you know, without disturbing us too much. Go to the washroom if you need. Bathrooms are located downstairs on the lower level. There'll also be a Q&A session afterwards, and with a mix of online questions coming from Zoom and a mix of questions coming from the audience as well. So please, in that context, follow some simple community guidelines. We will have zero tolerance for people who are promoting violence, discrimination, on the basis of race, sexual orientation, nation of origin. These people will be removed at the discretion of the technical team or moderator if it's taking place online. Please don't assume pronouns, gender, or based on people's appearances. Please use the pronouns that people give and would like to be used in their presence. And we ask that everyone share your perspective and make space and allow the voices of others to come through. And recognize that we're all here to learn. And finally, please approach this event and the questions from a place of respect and openness. And with that, I think I would just like to turn it back over to Chris and let him introduce Lucy. Thank you.
My notes.
Oh, sorry. There you go. I don't have yours.
No, they're up here. Koichuk, Brian, thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce our guest of honor, Lucy Bell, Sooth Kwas. Is close enough? Pretty good. I'll learn that by the end of today. Lucy comes from the Eagle clan of the Haida Nation. She's a nation-based scholar with a PhD candidate at Simon Fraser University, studying Haida museumology and repatriation as acts of reconciliation. She's also the recipient of the 2021 Sterling Prize for Controversy and the BC Museums Association's of Museum Stewardship Award for speaking out against racism at the Royal BC Museum and the need for change in the museum sector. Lucy is also a distinguished University of Victoria alumni, where she received her MA in Language Revitalization and Cultural Resource Management certificate. Personally, I've known Lucy for a couple of years, and during COVID, when we were all online, Lucy would come online. We sat on the Indigenous Listening and Learning Circle, where we as a group were talking about how do we bring senior leadership, senior Indigenous leadership to Simon Fraser University as a first kind of step towards reconciliation. And even online, when Lucy got on, she just had this presence about her, and I was like, it's just a testament to the leadership and the teachings of Haida matriarchs, and they just have this presence. Encourage all of you guys to go to Haida Gwaii as well, and you'll just know what I mean. So it's my utmost pleasure, and when Brian and Natani reached out to me to say, hey, would you help us MC this event, I just couldn't say no to kind of support the work that Lucy is doing. So without further ado, if you can all welcome Lucy to the stage.
My glasses are covered in eagle down. It's so amazing. I didn't realize how many of you were sitting behind me. It's such an honor to have you here with me today. Can you hear me okay way in the back? All yeah? Okay. From reconnaissance to repatriation, we're reflecting today on a point in history that I am grappling with for my dissertation from the 1950s to today, to the work of Bill Reid, to the work of the RBCM, UBC, MOA, and the Canadian Museum of History, where George MacDonald worked. Tla Yahda along Ijung. Today we are on the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish land, and I'm very grateful to be here to give my talk and for the kind welcome that you have given me and have always given me when I come here to speak. I give thanks to SFU, to the Bill Reid Gallery, and all of you for coming today. Let's see if I can do this. Yep. Singe lasti tulang, Sdahl K isken nangjaras kawit skakeas, hinu had kilka dikyang. Lucy Bell hinu yatsare kilka dikyang. Dio hodagang, dio odagang. Chichkitten stu diaskagang. At awaas stu di eskagang. Rosa Bell hinu di au kyagan. Mimi Jones di nan u ejan. Lucy Frank Ul'au U'ijan, Edison Bell, Moses Ingram, Iskan Vinton Jones, D. Chinalung U'ijan, Gudne Hulkel, Amelia Digat Jadas U'ijan, Bill Reid Gallery Ol Slungulung, Dungdi Kwagidung, Amelia. Haida Museology Gay, we will find a Haida word for that. PhD D. Kalungung, Wagian Haida Repatriation Committee Gay Thungulang. Haida Gwaii Iskan It Kunisi Iskan Di Tulang Di Koyadang. My name is Lucy Bell. My mom was Rosa Bell, and her mom was Mamie Jones, and I'm named after my great-grandmother, Lucy Frank, who was a weaver. My grandparents, my grandfathers were Edison Bell and Vinton Jones, and my great-uncle, Moses Ingram. And I want to thank them for supporting me, and I'm feeling their presence with me all the time. My daughter is Amelia Gudne Hulkel. I'm going to make her stand up so you can see who she is. Stand up and give a wave, Amelia. Amelia works here. She is an assistant curator working with Alia, and I told her in Haida that I am very proud of her. I'm working on my PhD in Haida museology and reflecting on the work of the Haidas in my generation all the way back to the ancestors who were a part of our belongings leaving Haida Gwaii. I think it's an important story to tell, and it's an important story to tell by a Haida. I really do want to give thanks to all of you who helped me on my PhD journey, to those who have supported me, just being my friends, being my fellow researchers, supporting me through scholarships and fellowships. I really raise my hands to those of you who have stood beside me, and do not blink an eye when I say, hey, can you look this up, or what do you know about this or that? You know, I probably had about a dozen people in this last week really jumping and helping me out, and I'm so grateful. And the people who provide, and the organizations that provide financial support to Indigenous students like me, I think that's just so incredible, and it allows me to give the space that my PhD research needs. I really do feel like my PhD is a healing journey after the troubles I've had with museums over the years, and I want to thank you for protecting that space for me. So like I said, my PhD is about how Haida museology has been an act of reconciliation, how my ancestors were participating in that act of reconciliation, and Tla Yahda, doing what's right for them at the time. It's also about our story of Tla Yahda, the work that I've been doing in repatriation with the Haida Repatriation Committee. There's probably about 100 of us that have been a part of this repatriation journey in the last 30 years. And we have been practicing Haida museology on our own terms in what feels right to us. And I think my ancestors did that as well. So my talk today, it really easily could be a whole dissertation, and it's only going to be a chapter, and I need to remind myself that, and maybe remind you too that this is just a chapter in what I'm going to write. And I'm just so grateful for you for coming along on this journey with me. So, you know, this is the chapter I know would be a difficult chapter to write, and to be able to speak it out loud and think with all of you big thinkers in the room and online, I think that's really important. So I thank you for that. I learned a new phrase in my research. It's so easy for us to be judgmental and to look back at what has happened around us before us, and to make judgment calls about what happened. And the word I learned, and some of you may know this, is anti-presentist. to strive to not be judgy of the historical events based on my personal values, beliefs, and experiences. And I think that's really important for us to consider. And I hope that when I do write this chapter in my book that I can show the most yakudang, the most respect I can doing that. So in my research in these last few years, it was not easy doing my research during COVID. I was not able for quite a while to get to go to the archives and the museum collections, the libraries, to meet in person with people. So it really stalled my research. So I managed to go to quite a few archives and museums with the intention of my dissertation. I've been to museums and galleries in archives with always researching something, always going to pick up our ancestors' remains, but not for my dissertation. So it really was important for me to take that time. So in the picture there, you'll see me there with Nani Dolores Churchill. We're in the Alaska State Museum. The next picture is of, oh, is that you? Oh, that's Amelia. I must have taken the picture. And a picture in the Burke Museum doing research, Amelia researching with me, and us at the Bill Reid Gallery when I took the Haida nerds, Haida, to the Bill Reid Centre to research and see what they had there from the Haida collection. I'll give you just a quick overview of our belongings. There's Haida Gwaii is, a small island just under Alaska, as you might know, and our little island had, some say, about 10,000 Haidas at one time, and my ancestors made such incredible belongings. Everything showed their crests, their sense of humor, their love for their families. And during the height of colonization, things like the Government Act, missionaries, traders, smallpox, the anti-potlatch law, museum collectors, private collectors, residential schools, all of that really hit us so hard. So when our population dropped down to less than 600 people, so did our belongings in our community. So we estimate about 12,000 belongings in museum collections. I'm sure that number has gone up. I'll have to ask Walker Brown about that. Most of our belongings were taken from the 1800s to the 1920s. Emmons, Newcomb, Swan, Jacobson, Reverend Harrison, Duff, MacDonald were among the people who have collected big chunks of our belongings over the years. Our belongings are scattered all over the world, and it really has been a lifelong journey for the Repatriation Committee and community members to track them. So the BC Totem Pole Preservation Project happened in the 50s. What was going on then was, the Haidas, our ancestors were kind of coming out of that fog and still living with the grief of what had happened and feeling the loss and the great changes that were put upon us. The 1926 Indian Act was revised, and it said the removal of totem poles from Indian reserves had to have the permission of Indian Affairs. No poles were being carved at the time. There was a handful of people who were quietly creating argillite poles, bracelets, weaving baskets. In 1949, Indigenous people were allowed to vote provincially. Residential schools were closing, and Indigenous leaders were fighting for the land. The anti-potlatch law was lifted in 1951. Way back in 1856, the CMH in Quebec was beginning to form. In 1886, the BC Provincial Museum opened at the legislature, and the province was late to the game. Wilson Duff and others were eager to keep BC Indigenous history and art in BC, in Canada. Wilson Duff became the provincial's first anthropologist at the museum at the age of 25. Wilson Duff was quite passionate about collecting, preserving, building connections with Indigenous communities. He would spend his summers in Indigenous communities. He oversaw the building of the Wawaditla, the Munga Martin House, and some say it was the first documented potlatch after the law was lifted. I was quite surprised at how much I had in common with Wilson Duff. He was the first anthropologist at the Provincial Museum. I was the first Indigenous manager at the Royal BC Museum. We're both grad students working at the museum, and we were both tasked with such big things to do. We were tasked with making big changes to displays, forging relationships with Indigenous people. We were facing museum limits, limits to space, limits to money, government oversight, and we both actually stayed at Gloria Cranmer Webster's house in Alert Bay at the beginning of our careers. Duff visited many coastal villages, and he said, as a museum man accustomed to handling every object of Haida art with care and respect, I was appalled at what I saw. He didn't seem to see himself as one of the people who were taking. He thought it was the people before him that were taking, the people around him that were taking. Duff and Harry Hawthorne created the British Columbia Totem Pole Preservation Committee that included UBC, the Provincial Museum, and the Department of Indian Affairs. Logging companies helped them financially. Have any of you seen the video on CBC about the pole removal? I'm going to share just a little clip of it. Let's hope it magically works.
The weather cleared and the work went on. A routine now, broken by some more wonderful moments. This little man provided one of the finest. Once he'd sat on top of the beaver pole, but when the fire toppled it forward, he'd fallen not into the damp ground, which would have eaten away his strong features, but over the edge of the bank above the beach. Some high tide had washed up an oil slick, which perhaps had helped preserve him. When we turned him over, the features that looked to the sky were as sharply defined as the carver had made them. The impassive old giants had been cut down to manageable size and caged, but remained as remote, austere, and unapproachable as ever. Impassive and unconcerned they might be, but they resisted with their sodden weight their passage back to the sea. What has been destroyed is not just a few hundred individual human lives. Human beings must die anyway. It was something even more complex and even more human. A vigorous and functioning society, the product of just as long an evolution as our own, well fitted to its environment and vital enough to participate in human cultural achievements not duplicated anywhere else. What was destroyed was one more bright tile in the complicated and wonderful mosaic of man's achievement on Earth. Mankind is the loser. We are the losers.
How odd to Brian for putting that little tidbit together. It's you can see the web link there. It's on CBC. You can watch the whole thing there. In all of my readings and watching this video, I really think that they thought they were doing the right thing. Duff said that New York kids can see it, but Massac kids can't, when he was talking about the poles that were taken away. I would say that we still couldn't see them. Through Bill Reid, he made a lot of friends, Solomon Wilson, Florence Davidson, Henry Young, Bill Reid's grandfather, Charles Gladstone, and he was urged to seek the advice and the support of the Skidegate Band Council. A Haida crew was hired, including Roy Jones and his relatives. Duff, I think, really looked to get the right permissions, and it was not easy. It really was not an easy task. Peter Kelly, the Haida minister, stepson of the chief Nunstings of Skungwai, was one of the people that accompanied him on one of the visits. At the time, the village wasn't an Indian reserve like Skidegate and Masset were. The Indian agent said Skidegate Band Council didn't have the authority to sell these poles to Duff. Duff got busy working to turn that village into a park, and it is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. For the removal of the poles, Skidegate Band Council received $800 and donated it to the church. Through all my readings and asking people about the Haida involvement in the decisions that they made at the time, I just know that couldn't have been easy for them. It was really hard to find those feelings. It was all about, and they chopped this one down, and they towed this one out, and they built a crate. You know, I didn't really find much for the feelings they were feeling. So I asked around to some of my colleagues and my friends on Haida Gwaii. I saw in Smiley and Smiley's journal, when they asked Roy, I asked them how they felt about the removal of totems from their ancestral homes. Roy said that they didn't really mind, but added, how would you like it if we came to Victoria and took away the tombstones from Pioneer Square? I also saw a few little hints about Haida superstitions in Smiley's journal. As everyone sat down to breakfast, the cook, Frank, he yelled, hey, everybody got to keep their own original seats or we'll have bad luck. While they were there, they said they didn't disturb any of the graves. And I wondered, when Roy and Mike were chopping out the little watchman and the crate fell on Roy's foot, he was in pain for the rest of the trip. I wonder if he took that as a sign. I asked Gwaii Edenshaw, my friend, carver, Repatriation Committee member, who lived with Bill Reid. He's also co-curator of the Bill Reid show that was here not too long ago. And he told me that Bill told him that his hands needed to see those sculptures for him to become the carver he would be. Bill Reid's grandson, Walker, a nation-based scholar, he said, I know some modern Haida artists say they don't think that should have happened, but I wonder if the same people would even be artists today if those poles and earlier poles and artifacts weren't taken from Haida Gwaii at those times. So it's complicated. It's really complicated. And it's not for any of us today to make any judgment calls. So much has been written about Bill Reid. Oh my God, you should see my living room. It's just stacked with books about him. I was there when the sculpture was put up at MOA. My mom was in the second cohort of the NITEP program, so I was a little girl, and at the time, I didn't have a button blanket, I had a crocheted blanket, and my mom and I danced around that pole with the other Haidas there, just so happy to be Haida that day. And it was not easy for me to be a little Haida girl in Vancouver. It really was not. So to know that to be Haida was something we could be proud of. You know, I tip my hat to Bill Reid for helping us and for his own journey of finding that pride and love for being Haida. He deserves a lot of credit. He grew up in Victoria, a distance from the Haida that he often spoke about and thought about. He forged so many friendships in the museum sector. It's just amazing how many friends he made. the monumental carvings at MOA, CMC, all around us today. It's just amazing what he did. He donated his carving tools that belonged to Charles Edenshaw that were passed on to Bill Reid's grandfather, and he donated them to MOA. I see the legacy in his grandchildren. Nika, my dear friend, co-chair of the Haida Repatriation Committee, the director of the Haida Gwaii Museum, I really do see her grandfather in her. His grandson, Walker, is an incredible researcher and lover of all of the belongings that he sees in museums. His grandson, Tyson, is an incredible artist, maker of things as well. Nika's 2 children also work at the Haida Gwaii Museum. So Bill Reid really does have a strong legacy. Museum relationships have really been challenging and rewarding. They can exist simultaneously. The Canadian Museum of Man, now the CMH, that was where George MacDonald worked, and he was an anthropologist and so incredibly passionate for the Northwest Coast and for all things Haida. He was fascinated with Disney's Epcot Center. He believed in education and entertainment. That's something that museums still seem to be upholding today. He had a vision for the Grand Hall. In 1984, they began the building of that beautiful Grand Hall. The Haida House is a Haida house, and it's surrounded by different poles from different Haida villages. The house was built in Masset, and Jim Hart led the building of that house, and then it was packed up and moved over to the museum. And the Masset Band Council at the time paid for Jim and a small crew to accompany that building and put it up. The Grand Hall also houses Bill's Spirit of Haida Gwaii, the Lutos replica, and Robert Davidson's bronze sculpture, Raven Bringing Light to the World. He really elevated Haida art, creations, belongings, and he welcomed Haidas at the museum. He also wrote quite a few publications on the Haida. Maybe he rushed a little bit. There's definitely a few flaws to be seen, but really they are beautiful publications. This past year I got to go to the CMH, and I went there for the purpose of seeing what his relationship was with the Haida. And they wheeled out a whole crate of his correspondence and notes for me to look at. And I went through it all, and I found one letter to the Haida. So if somebody's got some more, I'd like to see them. And on that one letter, it had a quick scribble on there saying, "and no response." So that was a little bit disappointing considering all the work he was trying to do on the Haida. I took a ride to Custa on a boat ride with George. He also helped me when I was curating little exhibits at Expo. The CMH has hosted so many interns, including a few Haida interns. And sadly, George was responsible for removing 110 of my ancestors' remains from 1966 to 1968. In 2000, we brought home 148 ancestral remains from the museum, including those 110 that George took. We estimate Haida repatriation has cost us well over $1 million, probably another $1 million in our own volunteer time, and it's taken us 30 years to bring home the remains of ancestors. George and I had a few other struggles. The museum started to reproduce argillite from the collection, but forgot to ask us. George was so passionate, he wanted to have a virtual version of Nai Iwan's, the monster house in Masset, didn't quite connect with the right people, Haida people on that. He also created a huge archival collection at the BRC that were once housed here that Brian spoke about. And those are the collections that I'm really excited to be delving into in the next few months. One last note about George. Brian, you need to write the book. I want to speak about the common threads throughout these generations. And what I've been finding was like Bill Reid and the museum folks that came before us, there was always friendship. There was always a time to be together and to contemplate things and to do things. And I find that's quite amazing. I think it's a testament to how Haida like to do business. You know, sometimes we're asked how come repatriation has been so successful. It's because we expect our museum friends to be our friends, to really be our friends. Come home and help us bury our ancestors that your institution has been holding for 100 years. Come and help me publish this or create that or talk about this or that. You know, it's hard work to be our friends. But I promise you the rewards are good. We've done quite a few collaborations, and I was really excited to learn about the collaborations that Bill had with museums, co-curating at the VAG. Nika and I have done that as well. We've also all had to navigate difficult decisions in the time that we were in, and I think that's really an important point. The pole removals probably was an incredible, difficult decision to make. The Repatriation Committee today has had to have similar difficult decisions. We had to learn how to repatriate our ancestors. We had to learn how to honor them. Knowing what we know about how to honor our ancestors, we had to come up with ways to honor them, not knowing who those ancestors were. You know, we've got certain roles and responsibilities as eagles or ravens when somebody passes away, and we had to learn new ways of showing respect. And I think that's the same with my ancestors before. Today, there's the Haida Gwaii Watchmen. And the Haida Gwaii Watchmen are throughout the Haida villages on Haida Gwaii, where there's still poles. In the picture here is my good buddy, Vince Collison. He is also a long-standing Repatriation Committee member, and he's been a watchman for quite a few years. That's his favorite place to be. And he credits, you know, he always gives thanks, and he reminded me today to give a shout out to Captain Gold and his wife Bernice, who looked after the village site before the Watchman program came to life. There is an artist-in-residence program that's often held here. And ironically, my first visit to Skungwai was with the RBCM. I took the director and the board chair on a visit there. Vince talks about his time there, and he messaged me and he said, I was grateful to have a lot of solo time in the village and simply zen out, knowing the historical connections that we still need to work on, how much more ways that we need to reconnect to all of our history. So like I said, Haida repatriation has been going on for a very long time. I've been involved for about 30 years as the co-creator of the Haida Repatriation Committee, which consists of folks from Masset and Skidegate, and now with folks from Alaska. In the 30 years, we've located and brought home over 500 of our ancestors' remains. It was not easy. I think things are getting a lot easier now. You know, at the very beginning of this, a lot of museum folks told us, no, you're never going to get your ancestors back. No, we've got NAGPRA, or no, we can't see you in 6 months. We're busy. You know, we've heard a lot of excuses over the years. But now I think times are changing, and it's amazing to be a part of this time of change. We have friends in so many museums that want to collaborate, that want to repatriate. And repatriation work has created so many opportunities for new Haida curators, artists to study the pieces, to hold these pieces in their hands like Bill Reid did, and for the researchers that get to go into the archives. The Haida Gwaii Museum is now bursting at the seams because of repatriation. So the future of Haida museology is something that I'm so excited about. The Repatriation Committee has grown, and so many of these, the people, our committee members, are also artists like Gwaii and Jolin who love to do research in museums, and our kids, we've got a growing generation of repatriators and Haida museologists. You'll see in this picture is my daughter Amelia and Nika's girl Gidkoyas, and there's a picture of Amelia at the Bill Reid Centre when we took the Haida Nerds there. My hope is that we can, in the future, build an extension of the Haida Gwaii Museum in my community of Old Masset, with the Haida Gwaii Museum bursting at the seams and 100 kilometers away, and with 12,000 Haida belongings out there, we need more space. And we've been talking about the need for a repatriation research center. I think I've got enough to write my chapter. And I really do want to say hawa to all of you, and hawa to our friends in the past, and hawa to Bill Reid for, you know, I used to think that he put his foot in the door for the next generation. He didn't put his foot in the door. He swung that door open, and he held it open for us. And for that, I am absolutely grateful. I want to thank all of you for being here with me today. And when I'm ready to think out loud about my next chapter, maybe you can come and help me again. How?
Hawa, Lucy. And just for those that are online, just a reminder that to use Slido for your questions. We'll be monitoring there. I really want to thank you for your talk and your chapter. I was really empowered around one of your earlier statements, just around that your PhD journey has really been a healing journey, and I would love for you to expand a little bit on over your 30 years of experience and your research thus far. How has that healing experience been? And I'll start there, and then we'll go to the floor and Slido, and we'll go back and forth. So over to you, Lucy.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Alia? Hawa, I appreciate that question. Some of you may know that I had a really difficult time at the Royal BC Museum and walked away because I was enduring such racism. And part of the reason that I left was that even though it was in writing that they would support my PhD, my supervisor said that I had to quit my PhD or take a demotion to finish my PhD. And my studies and my work with my people, that's so precious to me. And I thought that was just so hurtful, and it was one of the last straws. And I really felt after that, I felt the need to protect my research time, my PhD time even more, and to use it to find joy in my life again. I do have another essay coming out about finding the joy in research, but I think that's really important, and I think if we're not enjoying and healing as we're doing our research, change your topic, or do something else. But I'm just so grateful to be on this healing PhD journey.
Thank you so much. Brian, is there a question from the floor?
Yeah, if anyone's wondering why I'm looming over the stage here, I'm just me and Chris are just sharing. He's looking at online questions. I'm kind of moderating who has questions on the floor. So if anyone does have a question or comment, please, yes.
Hi, Lucy. I'm Henry Seaweed's granddaughter. I wondered what your advice might be for Indigenous people considering a career in museums, how one might approach that in a way that keeps us in a good way and advances the things that are important to us.
I always will have a love for the work that happens in museums and the possibility, the potential of museums. People think that I would never want to work in a museum again. My dream is to bring back the Aboriginal Cultural Stewardship Program that I did in 1994. It only, I think, lasted 2 years, but to be able to get your foot in the door, look at those internships and go and see if that's what you want to do. So there is the Indigenous internship at MOA, there's one at the CMH, and try it out, volunteer, and find your peeps. I think that's really important, to have really good support within anywhere you work, right? And through our difficult experience at the RBCM, we started to have these support groups with other Indigenous people in the province. And so we call ourselves the Indigenous Museum Cousins. And right now we're a support group. And being able to be truthful about our experiences and actually saying it out loud, some of the crazy things that we've experienced in museums, and to have people who understand that, I think that's been really important for us. Yeah, if you're going to get into that career, know that you don't have to be boxed into just be an Indigenous curator too. If you have a different kind of passion, museums need diversity in all departments. So I encourage you. I'm here for you.
I think we'll go to Slido, and Hawa for that answer is first question on Slido is, how do you keep track of the repatriation process with all the documentation that belongs in one's belongings, such as archives, photos, archival photos and collections, and the list goes on?
That's a good question. At the Haida Gwaii Museum, we've got I, who is our repatriation coordinator, and I think a lot of that work now falls on his shoulder. Back in the day, we were kind of very grassroots, very much working off the sides of our desks and finding different people taking on different parts of it in Masset and in Skidegate. So our records were kind of all over the place. And every summer, either there'd be an intern, a summer student in Masset or in Skidegate, and we were writing letters. We didn't have the internet when we started, so writing letters to museums all over the world looking for our ancestors, and students would be just sending those letters off. So thankfully we've got Nika's brother Walker, who is such a keen researcher. They keep track of so much of that. Thank God.
How about any more questions in the audience that's with us today? Yes, back there, please.
How are Lucy? Thank you so much. My name is Adel Iskander. I'm a faculty member at SFU. I want to raise this question, but from a different sort of positionality, but similar sort of settler colonial experience. I'm originally from Egypt, and Egypt has had a long history of trying to repatriate its ancestors, if you will. Millions of items scattered all over the world through European colonialism. And it's been a very, very difficult task. The question that is often raised, not as resistance to repatriation, but rather to think through what it means to have some of these works, some of those ancestors travel, but on Haida terms or on Egyptian terms. If once as many items are repatriated, what does it mean for these works to then move around and have the international and global impact, and for the stories of those ancestors to be told by Haida scholars and writers and thinkers and poets? I'm just curious, how do we articulate that? And if that's something that your incredible team has contemplated or thought of. Thank you.
I think we're going in the direction of the best pieces, that the museums always want to display. The day's going to come when they all rest on Haida Gwaii again, and that will be Haida decisions as to who gets to borrow them, and it's already happening. And I think that's really exciting. And I don't think that the committee thinks that they need to go home and stay home and sit on a dusty shelf on home and not be seen. These relationships need to be ongoing, and the education needs to be ongoing, but on our own terms. It's always kind of gut-wrenching to go to an exhibit and see all these Haida things and like, geez, did they even talk to anybody about this beautiful piece that they're showing? And they're shown more like trophies, like, look at this beautiful thing I've got, but no context at all. So in the future, I think that context will be put by those pieces. Maybe there'll be videos of people speaking about them, a little bit more history done on them. How?
Thanks for that question. Back over to Slido. The question here from Slido is, as you mentioned in your presentation, this is one chapter of your research and your dissertation. The person on the Zoom or on the Slido was asking, is there something more that you're excited about or looking forward to in your research process that you haven't dived into yet?
The rest of my chapters. I've done quite a few interviews with Haidas back at home, and I'm really excited to be telling their story and running it by them and fiddling with sorting out all of what they've told me and coming up with pulling out like new museum practice and speaking about Haida museology as something that we can all strive for. I'm excited for that.
Back to the floor. If not, I'll go to Slido. This is bringing the questions right back home to SFU, and they thank you for your presentation, and they talk about the SFU mace, which is used at convocation ceremonies that was designed by Bill Reid, using local materials, but as a symbolic gesture of settlement and colonialism. How do you feel about artifacts such as that and how they're used in this current time?
I'm going to have to go and research that.
That might be a chapter.
Oh, maybe a little paragraph. I love it that artists, don't have to feel like they have to be stuck in in somebody's perceived way of creating. You look around this gallery, and Bill was such a beautiful maker of things, and you know, people say, you know, artists like Bill push the boundaries. So I think all artists push boundaries, and I think it's cool. Like if that was what he wanted, then that's great.
That's fascinating. I had no idea that Bill Reid created the mace. That's news to me as well.
You're gonna have to show it to me now.
Yeah, no, I want to see it. Any more questions in the audience here? Yes. In the purple shirt.
Yeah, I kind of have a cluster of thoughts, but I wanted to know how you deal with the idea of ownership that sometimes comes attached with how museums view the artifacts, and in cases where museums do refuse to give back or kind of cooperate with the repatriation. How do you go around achieving repatriation and keeping those connections, and also most importantly, protecting your energy and your community?
Maybe I'll tell you about our experience with the Pitt Rivers Museum. So that was one. They have over 200 belongings collected by Reverend Harrison from Masset, from my community, and they're pretty old pieces. And when we were doing Expo, I was also bringing a little group of Haidas to go and see the collections in Europe. So, you know, that was a museum. I said, I wrote to them and said, can we come see you in 6 months? And they said, no, we're busy. It took a long time to become friends with the people at the Pitt Rivers Museum. Some of them still aren't our friends, but I don't think they work there anymore. But we really realized that we needed to make friends with them, and that we're not going to get anywhere. We really wanted our one ancestor back. And you know, we had gone through the Canadian museums, the American museums, and then we hit up European. And so the Pitt Rivers, you know, hid behind legislation that says they don't have to give back anything, but we kept at them. And thankfully, our friends, Kara Krompotich, who came and lived with me and did her PhD on Haida Repatriation. She was an Oxford student. Her supervisor was curator and then director for a while of the Pitt Rivers Museum, Laura Piers. And we had such high expectations for our new friends. And it probably was a lot of pressure for them too to help us to bring our ancestor back. So we got a nice grant and sent over 30 Haidas, and we stayed there for weeks studying our pieces, doing recordings on Haida culture, speaking to the education departments. We really Haidaized that institution, and it really changed how they work now. And it was quite painful for us to leave our ancestor there. You know, one of our delegates brought a Bentwood, we brought a Bentwood box. We had a button blanket that we wrapped him in, and we did a ceremony, and you know, said words to him to tell him that we were so sorry we couldn't take him with us today, but we're going to come back and we're not going to forget you. And the museum, our museum folks worked so hard and behind the scenes doing all they could to support this. And within a few weeks, we got a call saying, come and get your ancestor, he's ready to go. So, what was your question? Was that about ownership? Yeah, it's a big question, and we have to often remind them that they are the keepers right now, that the true owners are the people on Haida Gwaii, and they had original owners. The museums need to be reminded of that all the time.
That was a great question, and I'm just going to dovetail into a Slido question. There was a question just around, are you still finding Haida belongings in museums and private collections around the world? And if you are, whereabouts are most of these cultural expressions in our ancestors at?
I am right now a part of a little team that's doing a repatriation cost and benefit analysis for First Peoples Cultural Council. And we're really looking at the repatriation efforts in the province. And part of that work is Walker researching, finding out what are the collections around the world. And he's putting this together, and it'll be part of our report that comes out. For the Haida, a lot of our collections are in BC at the Royal BC Museum, Museum of Anthropology, in Quebec at the Canadian Museum of History, and in Europe at the British Museum, in Germany, in Paris. Our stuff's everywhere, and it's a lot of work to research and find out who was collecting. We're kind of new to finding out about private collectors and stuff that's being passed around by dealers. That's a whole nother dissertation.
Thank you. And that talks a little bit about your healing journey. Is that story about your ancestor that you couldn't take home, and that emotional labor that our people have to go through in this work, that you have to leave one of your ancestors there and hope come back and continue to kind of lobby and fight. So I want to really thank you for your tenacity, and all of the questions state that. Can you talk a little bit about the tactic in museums around screen objects and how some artists people are deliberately making artifacts for visitors that are not authentic or of less value?
I feel like this is Luann Neal's dissertation that she should be writing, talking about cultural appropriation. It's a huge worry, and Northwest Coast creations are just so belonging. It's we really do need better protection in Canada for that.
Yeah. And then there was another question just around, as settler communities and non-Indigenous communities, sometimes our only exposure to Indigenous cultures and belongings are in museums, like the Royal Museum in Victoria. How can we support repatriation and provide opportunities to learn and appreciate Indigenous histories?
Well, I would say it's important to make friends, to get out there and support Indigenous people in your own communities, to be finding out what they're raising money for, or what they're up to, and how you can support whatever is passionate about you. If you want to support language revitalization, repatriation, there's so much that could be supported that's relevant and that people are asking for. You can go and buy yourself some pretty earrings when you're traveling, and you can support financially when people are repatriated. You can support the Haida Gwaii Museum, make a donation towards repatriation, volunteer. There's lots you can do.
Yeah, the museum's bursting at the seams. I wrote that down right away, and I remember, it was early 2000s. I think I was 2004, 2005. I was up there. Beautiful museum, and as this is a common theme amongst repatriation and Indigenous communities, as communities get their artifacts and their loved ones back, they also need a place to put them. And sometimes that's a challenge around capacity in Indigenous communities, because they do want to ensure that they're showcasing their culture, not only for visitors, but their own communities. But they don't have the capacity to do that. And we kind of seen that play out a little bit with the Royal Museum, in the expansion of the Royal Museum, and the call from other First Nations up and down the coast to kind of say, well, we want our own space. We just don't want it all in Victoria. So if you can expand a little bit around that and some advice that you would give to the province, the leaders, but also the Indigenous communities on how we can continue to learn from the Haida and ensure that our culture, how diverse we are in BC, gets preserved.
I think you're absolutely right that museums are waking up to the need for repatriation and are excited about it, and communities are scrambling for space. And in our recent in our repatriation cost and benefit analysis, I interviewed quite a few people working in community and learned about their creative ways of making space within communities. One turned their old daycare into a cultural learning library, and they're putting some of their belongings in there. Other people are adding on, are trying to find new space, thinking about how to transport their belongings that came home, how to transport by boat to get them to ceremony. There's a lot of creative thinking that's happening, just not the money that's needed. So there needs to be some transfer of the money that's coming from these museums to go along with those belongings. And I know from working for the provincial museum that money's tight at that level, but geez, it's even tighter within Indigenous communities to have that space, and to take away that idea that you need a Class A classification to house our belongings. We know how to house our belongings and take care of them probably way better. I've been in a lot of back rooms, and I know the potential to take care of them in a different way is there. We just need the space and some financial support.
Yeah. Any questions from the floor?
Thank you for your presentation, Lucy, and I'm honored to be here. I wanted to ask about the Museum of Anthropology's involvement in repatriation. Are they involved in any capacity?
The Museum of Anthropology?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, one of those poles that was from that pole restoration project was returned quite recently in the last couple of years. And they've been on the repatriation scene probably longer than most museums.
I don't think. Is this on? I just wanted to ask you personally whether you think there is a place for museums as they are now.
You had to say "as they are now," didn't you? I'm going to say that one's complicated. I think there's a place for smaller spaces that are more nimble and are able to do things quicker. At the provincial museum, it's painful how long it takes to do things, how many people it takes. That was big learning for me, that it didn't have to be all just me doing something. There was 12 other people that had to be involved. So I see a need for smaller spaces like this, who are opening their doors and just so responsive and creative in how they bring people in and how they educate and co-curate. And I hope to see more of that happening in all museums and galleries.
And that's one of the things we've been hearing from First Nations as well, around the province, around repatriation, is they want to tell their story in their community. They want to ensure that as things come back, that they have the ability to welcome visitors into their villages and tell the story of the place. So this is a big one. It's a great question. Got me riled up a little bit too. How do we leverage the Canadian consciousness to include the repatriation of land around the whole notion of repatriation of not just our ancestors and our artifacts, but also the repatriation of land? Is those things were removed for a reason. So how do we ensure that it's not just about those things, but also about the land?
Damn, that's a
know.
good
I
question.
got riled up too.
I feel like that probably needs to be another chapter, but it definitely is something that came up, and I don't think I have an answer. I'm going to kind of talk around it. But definitely in our cost analysis, that definitely was coming up as a theme throughout. And it wasn't necessarily, all just about needing space to build a center, needing space to put our ancestors back to the earth, needing our space to do our Indigenous things indigenously. I don't think that's my expertise to answer that. That's really huge, and I'm probably not gonna sleep thinking about that one. Thank you.
Me neither.
But
Me neither. It's a big one, but it's connected. It's definitely connected, because when I was listening to you talk, it's some of where the poles were, it wasn't designated and surveyed as a reserve. It was a village site, but in a lot of our communities have those village sites where there's artifacts and middens and all of those things that weren't surveyed as a reserve for whatever reason. So it's not technically, all of it's our land, but it's technically, so the land question kind of comes into play. I'm going to link into this one. It's another big one. Currently, there's no federal laws in Canada related to repatriation. Is this something that needs to be done in the future? And do you feel that the repatriation process can continue, or does it need specific federal legislation to be better?
Holy, somebody's doing some deep thinking.
I know.
That's great. I'm going to give a shout out to the Canadian Museums Association Move to Action report. It's a beautifully fierce written report, and there is a big section in there about repatriation. And I just got an email this morning. We've been talking about it for a while. The folks at the CMA are good friends and supporters, and they reached out to Nika and I today about having a planning session, because we need to start lobbying for a repatriation framework that could lead to legislation. I was one of the spokespeople from BC that got to go to Hill Day and go and lobby the politicians on the Hill in May. There was a bunch of us from across Canada lobbying for that and trying to get it in politicians' minds that it's time. So I feel like it's going to happen, and the ball is rolling, and there's a very strong group of people at the Canadian Museums Association that's at the forefront of that.
Yeah. I think if Chief Ian Campbell was here, he'd be referencing the Cemetery Act and all of the different acts that protect modern cemeteries and historic colonial cemeteries. And he said there's nothing in legislation that talks about the protection of our places of burial and our sacred spaces, so we definitely have to do it. So I can hear him whispering in my ear somewhere. So is there any questions from the floor before we start wrapping it up?
These have all been really great questions. It's a great conversation, but we still have a couple more minutes, so if anyone else, yeah.
Thank you. So I guess it kind of jumps off the question that the person asked before me, but with policy, do you see repatriation of stolen artifacts, that the work that Haida is doing with that, as a possibility for other nations in BC and like across Canada and even the United States as well, to gain their artifacts back and their rightful pieces of art and ancestors and work and all of that?
Yes. I'll give another shout out to the Indigenous Repatriation Handbook that me and Nika and Luann published a few years ago. And you'll see the Haida policy, our letter from the our hereditary and elected leaders, giving the Haida Repatriation Committee the authority to be the leaders of repatriation. And I think it's helped a lot of other nations. We've definitely we get asked by nations across Canada how we did it and how we maneuvered around NAGPRA, the law in the States that says that they'll repatriate sacred items, ancestral remains to the tribes in the States. It doesn't say anything about the Canadian ones, and museums at the start were hiding behind that. And our response was like, it doesn't apply to us, put that away. Here's our letter from our leaders, and this is what we're going to do. And it worked. So I think our example is a good example of how to go forward. And some have asked us for advice, and other people are figuring it out and doing it what's more appropriate for their own nations, which is amazing. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna wrap up and for the Q&A portion of this, Lucy, and I just as a Squamish man and Indigenous person, I really want to thank you and all of your colleagues for all of your work. To me, as an Indigenous person, repatriation is sacred work. It's heavy work. There's a lot of emotional and spiritual labor that goes with it. And it tends to be very quiet work because our culture tells us how to do those things, or we have to learn how to do them, as Lucy mentioned. So just on behalf of myself, I really want to thank you for your decades of work in this field in relations to telling your nation's story and ensuring that your loved ones are going to make it home to Haida Gwaii, and just as you continue on your healing journey, to always take care of yourself and do those things to brush yourself off and with your teachings. And I just really want to thank your family and your daughter for allowing your mother to do this work, and because she's probably sitting reading a book sometimes and looking through documents. So there's also that emotional labor onto families, and I just really want to recognize your family as well for allowing you to do this really great work and as you continue your journey. So hawa, Chinquim and Tomi in my language, and we're grateful for all the things that you do. So hoicho.
And I'd absolutely like to echo Sitoktin's remarks. And before we ask you all to join us in some refreshments and some food, I'd like to ask the head of our family at the Bill Reid Centre to maybe just come up and say a final thank you to Chris and to Lucy. So, and after this, please get up, have some food, have some drinks, and visit with one another. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you so much for all your work, all your hard work that you've been doing, and just, just sitting here and listening to you share your story, and the current work that you're doing is I don't know why I'm getting emotional, but like I can't imagine what that is to just. You're representing not only your family, but your community and the connection to, your community's ancestors. And I just feel all of that hard work that you do every single day. And I don't have all the words that I can say, but I just want to say, thank you for that. And being a leader in the field and someone for many of the upcoming Indigenous students to follow and mentor and continue to see you grow and to shine. But thank you so much. And so on behalf of the Bill Reid Centre, I would just like to express a little token of appreciation, and we look forward to all the work that you're going to be continuing to do with the center and your PhD, and I just wish you all the best. And Chris, thank you so much for helping us as well, for being such a great co-host and for really helping us to honor and uplift Lucy today. And thank you so much for doing the Q&A. And here's another little gift from the Bill Reid Centre as well. And I'll turn it back over to Brian.
I'm done going around the TV. I'll just come up on the stage. I don't think there's anything else really to share. I'd just like to, again, thank you guys, and please, everyone, and join us in some refreshments and some good company, I hope. Thank you.